Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Inside segment. I'm Harold Fisher. As D.C. residents wrestle with a mix of emotions over President Trump's federal takeover, we're drilling down on what the actions are likely to mean for those who live, work, and play in D.C. From the likelihood of National Guard troops patrolling city streets to efforts to move homeless encampments out of sight, how will these efforts really work? Who will be helped or hurt? Well, joining me to talk about this and to sort through the data and politics are Aisha Williams, Chief Strategist and Subject Matter Expert in Human and Social Services, Eugene Puryear, Community Organizer and Journalist with Breakthrough News, and of course, Ron Hampton, retired MPD officer and former head of the National Black Police Association. Thank you all for joining me for this important conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So, Ron, let me start with you. The reporting from yesterday and the announcement from the president was that there are going to be about 800 National Guard members deployed, and they are ready to begin patrolling D.C. streets. We've already seen some of that as recently as last night, but the exact plan, the scope of how this is going to work out isn't clear. As a former MPD officer, shed a little light on how all of this is setting in with MPD.
Thank you very much, first of all, Harold, for having me.
Sure thing.
I think they're probably up in the air too. They may not know how all of this is going to work. When you see the pictures on TV, you see the federal officers walking in groups. That's not how you use the patrol. They're going to be standing on corners, doing those kind of things. I don't believe that they know exactly what it is that they're going to do, and Metropolitan probably doesn't know either. Metropolitan is going to continue to patrol and do the things that they've been doing all along, because this is the onus is on the federal people to do what it is that they're going to do, unless they've passed down some specific policies and rules about how this is going to take place. And as probably today, that probably hasn't taken place. But I don't think it's a good idea, because the National Guard and federal officers aren't individuals who work and patrol streets, drive patrol cars, talk with citizens, answer calls for service, try to provide referrals for services and things that community people, residents like myself, I live in the district, need to have in the process of trying to do public safety. And it's also a bad idea in the sense that real public safety, the public is involved in that process, and the public hasn't been involved in this process. They've been victimized by it, really.
Yeah, because one of the things that I really would find particularly curious for those officers who are in those patrol cars, or even on the occasions when you may see them on the street in their beats, if they are now, instead of having one or two DC police officers together, but now you may have one or two DC police officers, and you've got a National Guardsman, and maybe down the road you may have an FBI agent walking. If this were happening when you were on the police force, how would you feel about that, having, for lack of a better term, a tag along?
Well, I wouldn't have liked it myself. It's not something that I would have wanted to do or enjoyed to do, because I think policing belongs to the public. You know, there's a saying in the UK that the police are the people and the people are the police. We don't necessarily, or policing in America don't necessarily operate like that. But the idea that there's going to be federal officers and Army troops standing on corners, it reminds me of what it was like in '68 when I came back home on leave from the Air Force, and the riots was here in the city. You saw the National Guard, you saw the Jeeps and all that kind of stuff. It's really, to me, it's a show that's being put on rather than an attempt to provide actual public safety, which the public is involved in that process in our community. So I just think that it's going to be a lot of confusion. I don't believe that the Army and FBI agents going to be riding in cars. They're going to be walking footbeats in the street, and so officers. But let me say this before I conclude. I think the Metropolitan Police Department did itself a disservice because during COVID, officers sat in cars and didn't do anything other than sit in cars, and they would park the cars from time to time. They are still doing that today. And the way you get to know the public is you had to get your hind parts out of the car and walk and talk to the people that live and work in this city and in the neighborhoods. And they're not doing that. When I was a police officer and I walked the footbeat most of my career and worked in program development, but if the chief of police or some official had rolled by while we were sitting in the car, we would have had hell to pay because you can't be a police officer and sit in a car. And so I just don't understand that process why they sit in cars and don't do anything. And they don't, even if they sit in their cars, they could speak to people. They don't even do that. So I wasn't surprised the other day when I saw that this percentage was around 72 or 73% of the people who live in this city didn't feel safe. And part of the reason is because they don't know who their public safety officers are. They don't know who their police officers are because they're not out in the public talking and walking and working with people. If we walked the footbeat, we had to knock on doors and introduce ourselves and do those kind of things. They're not doing that. So some of this result that is portrayed in the statistic is because they are not doing the things that put their department and what they do every day on notice with the public, and that's really important. But the service, the Fed people are going to be standing on corners. They may be riding in cars, but you can't provide what it is that they want to provide, which is a show and visibility. You can't do that being in the car.
Aisha, it's been a day since this announcement was made at the White House, and of course, since the mayor had her first formal press conference about it. Over the past 24 hours, I'm sure you've had a chance to at least begin to dissect what this all means from your standpoint. What do you think?
So thanks so much for having me.
Sure.
When we think about the district and what this means for residents, and of course, being someone who works in human and social services and has an extensive background in housing, as you know, I think this order, what it does at its core is 5 things. So it supports institutionalizing people who are suffering with severe mental illness. So these are folks who we see, our neighbors, our unhoused neighbors, who may, be having mental illness. The country has moved away from, until now, the decision to institutionalize people in favor of other evidence-based practices. The second thing it does is it prioritizes grants and laws against open drug use, squatting, encampments, and other sort of forms of being unhoused. The third thing it does is it restricts funding for harm reduction. And so that is a practice whereby, rather than, throwing someone in jail, we provide safe use centers for them and work with them at their own rate, meeting them where they are, to be able to reduce the harm of the substance that they're using. And then 2 more things, number 4 and 5, it heightens requirements for evidence-based housing programs, such as housing first programs and low barrier housing programs for folks. And then finally, it allows or requires the collection of personal health data actually on individuals, and in some cases, requires them to share that information, requires sharing that information with law enforcement. And so when I think about what this means for district residents, here's what we know. Homelessness and housing crises, that is an economic issue. Yes, there are many things that precipitate leading up to a person experiencing homelessness. But there are people who use drugs and who are not unhoused. There are people who lose jobs, and because they have strong social networks or stronger social networks, they don't end up sleeping on the street, or perhaps they're able to couch surf longer. Oftentimes, it's nothing to do with drugs or severe mental illness. It is simply, perhaps there was a domestic dispute in the home, women and children leaving that. It could be the loss of a spouse through death, divorce, splitting up, incarceration, something like that. Or just a bill hit the wrong way at the wrong time. And don't we know that most people are just on the edge, one of economic or financial crisis away from being unhoused. And so what that means for us, what we know is that, if you are experiencing a crisis or you think you may be on the edge, particularly for women and children and really anyone, you need to know the resources that you can lean on. And that includes calling DC's Department of Human Services. DC does an excellent job among many communities in the nation of addressing homelessness and helping people to be able to stay housed when they're on the edge and it looks like an event is going to sort of take you over the edge. And so calling the Department of Human Services, calling 211, that is really the message that I would like to provide to district residents, particularly at a time when we know that folks are economically vulnerable because of all of the cuts, not just in social safety net programs and social benefits, but also people losing jobs.
So hold on. Mm-hmm. If you'll allow me, everything you said is fine. That is not what we heard from the White House yesterday, Aisha. The President of the United States said, we are going to clear out the homeless camps and we're going to try and find a place to put them. Yes. He did not mention the DC Department of Social Services. He did not give a phone number. And we already know from the president's actions in the past, he does not want to see homeless encampments. Okay, number one. And we do certainly know that, yes, some of the people who are experiencing homelessness had a bad day or bad month or bad several months of missing bills and end up on the street. We know that there is a substantial number of these people who do have mental health issues, some of them severe, some of them do have drug problems. But we also know that there is a significant number of people who have just given up and said, this is where we want to be, leave me alone. And I guess my question is, we don't know yet where these people, when they are cleared from these homeless encampments and underneath bridges and the like, where they're going to go, where the government is going to put them. And suffice it to say, as I said, nobody said anything about DC. The president said we're clearing them out. And my question is, what do you think of that? And how do you think the DC government is going to be able to navigate that?
So thank you for that opportunity for clarification. So we don't know where they are going.
Go ahead.
We don't know where they are going, and it is frightening. I think our friend just needed to mute.
I got it. Go ahead.
So what I think about it is, I think people need to be prepared and know their resources, which is why I wanted to highlight the DC Department of Human Services. Because to be real honest, with everything that's going on, we don't know where a lot of people are going. And then when we find out, oftentimes we can't get them back. And so it's best to focus on being able to lean in on those resources to prevent falling into that situation in the first place for people who are financially vulnerable at this time for whatever set of reasons. Now, For the
No,
people
well,
who are
hold on 1 second. I am going to let you finish your point, but I've got to take a really, really quick break. So please don't forget your point. Don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the federal takeover of DC's Metropolitan Police Department. My guests are Aisha Williams, Chief Strategist and Subject Matter Expert in Human and Social Services, Eugene Puryear, Community Organizer and Journalist with Breakthrough News, and Ron Hampton, retired MPD officer and former head of the National Black Police Association. Eugene, I promise I will get to you, but please, Aisha, finish your point, please.
Yes, thank you. And so as for the folks who are out in encampments and being so-called cleared out and how the district is handling it, certainly I do need to reach to my friends in Muriel Bowser's administration and say, what is going on? We're all still reeling. I don't even think it might have just hit 24 hours since this announcement took place. But what I will say, you asked me about how the district government is navigating it. I will be honest in saying I think that Muriel Bowser and her team are doing a masterful job at balancing, at playing a balancing act under a very complicated set of circumstances without the same tools to be able to resist some of the infiltration into DC's home rule. And what I would say for district residents who are, sitting around the kitchen table or, folks who are someplace else for whatever set of reasons and trying to navigate what's going on. We will weather this. We will weather this. But you have to know what your resources are that are available to you. And this is a time for DC residents to lean into each other. So if you do see someone who needs help, let's not focus on passing judgment or trying to figure out how they got there and why you're not there, right? Let's focus on helping each other. We are still trying to figure out what's next. So I always tell folks, don't pass judgment. If someone is, asking for a hand up or just a moment of help, then lean into helping that person. And also, again, know the resources that can help yourself or that can help your unhoused neighbors at this time.
Eugene, who is going to be helped and who is going to be hurt by the president's executive orders announced this takeover?
Well, I think you can determine that very quickly by looking at his statements in the press conference. He says a very natural thing for him to do as a real estate guy. So I think the people who are going to be helped the most are going to be the forces of gentrification in DC, the big hotel companies and others who want to see what I would essentially call an ethnic cleansing of young Black people out of the areas where they want to frequent that are considered sort of business places or places to gather or all these different sort of pieces, because this is the perception that Trump is leaning into, which is the non-factual but ultimately racist perceptions that somehow if you come to DC that there's going to be this wild, violent time that you're never going to be. I mean, I can remember living in DC when I first got there in 2004. It used to be that young kids, especially from east of the river, would come hang out on the steps of the National Portrait Gallery and Gallery Place. And all the time I would see them, I never saw anything than teenagers running around having a good time.
That's right.
But then when they decided that Gallery Place was going to be the place that they were going to bring in a big wave of new restaurants and new apartments and all these other things, all of a sudden there's a million police officers. Every action is criminalized. Right. And in fact, the level of tension and violence seemed to go up in that area. And so I think that certainly speaks to also who's going to be the most hurt here. I mean, obviously, Trump is trying to raise this issue of gun violence. Well, the people, quote unquote most likely to do the shooting are the most likely to be shot. So, I mean, by criminalizing those who are the most likely to be carrying guns for whatever reason, as opposed to finding ways to reach out to them and actually change what's going on, I think says that these federal officers, the National Guard, just like I have to say MPD, will be operating by who they perceive to be some sort of criminal, and then taking some sort of action that they perceive will be, helpful, which is basically to get them off the streets in a short way. And I just want to say a couple other points about this, because, the entire premise of this, and this is why I think facts are so important, because, when it comes to quote unquote crime, it's a very emotional issue. I've been a victim of a home invasion robbery. I totally understand that. But, the reality is in Washington, D.C., violent crime is down 26% year on year this year. It was down 35%, or roughly 35% in 2024 from 2023. Homicides were down both times. The issue of 2023, that was big carjackings, also down right now in Washington, D.C. And then if you look at the sort of broader premise behind this, by the way, that's a 30-year low in terms of violent crime. So the whole idea of first premise, which is that DC is violent and out of control and it's increasing, is not true. The second premise, which is the only way to resolve this is to put more people with guns on the street, is also not true. You look at Chicago, which had the most murders, in terms of numbers in 2024, but had about a 6% lower in terms of the number highlighted by the president, the 27.3 homicides per 100,000 people in the district. Well, Chicago is a little bit below us, or actually significantly below us, about 6% points there, but they actually have fewer police. So there's an element there that there's kind of an Occam's razor, that the idea of having more police necessarily leads to lower crime. You look at a city like Newark, New Jersey, under the leadership of Ross Baraka, where they have seen over the past several years a 50% drop in homicides. In Newark, one of the city's most sort of notorious for a lot of homicides and many people being killed. And almost all of that is associated with more robust community programs and violence interruption and other pieces like that. And then you had Judge Janine coming in and saying, well, I need to be able to throw more kids in prison. But we know from all of the research that has been done on this issue that longer, quote unquote, tougher sentences do not play a deterrent effect in crime. There is a range of different studies, but they range from about 6% to 35% is the role of mass incarceration and the huge drop in crime that has happened since 1991, right? So that means that there is not a study out there that says that a majority of the fall of violent crime in the United States and crime in general has anything to do with locking people up. And certainly I think we haven't seen that in DC. And the final thing I just want to say about this, though, is to respectfully disagree a little bit with Aisha, because I feel part of the reason we're in this situation is because those facts and those premises I just stated have been consistently reinforced by Muriel Bowser and a number of members of the DC Council who have continually failed to fully implement the NEAR Act, didn't implement their own gun safety task force recommendations on that point, and have consistently tried to have longer sentences and more police officers as their only real sort of resolution in a major way to the issues that happened in 2023 and before. So to some degree, Trump is actually building on what has already been done by local politicians in DC. And I think now is an opportunity for them to have a come to Jesus moment and start to say that we need to move on facts, not on fear.
All they have to do.
Hold on for a minute, Ron. Aisha, did you want to respond to what Eugene was saying?
Well, and I just want to point out, I'm speaking very specifically about how this administration, Muriel Bowser's administration, has actually built on the success of housing policies beginning actually during the Mayor Williams administration when it comes to ways to deal with homelessness. And so I wasn't speaking to the rest of the things that that Muriel Bowser or the administration has done, but I know the work that the district has done because I personally participated in it. And we know that, to your point, Eugene, penalizing, criminalizing, being unhoused, criminalizing homelessness or experiencing homelessness, we know that doesn't work because we know it is an economic issue. It's an issue of financial and other resources. We know that what works is to help people to find stable housing, not shelter. Shelter is actually the more expensive intervention here. But we know that what works is to help people stabilize in housing first so that they can then deal with their other issues. And of course, there's a spectrum of interventions that you can use to help people to address their situation with their housing, whether there's prevention, diversion, and then there's also other types of housing such as permanent supportive housing and transitional housing and so forth. And we know that giving people options that meets them where they are, that also works. So I just wanted to clarify, I was speaking to that specific issue, that this DC, Muriel Bowser's administration has done well and has continued to build on, really beginning with Tony Williams when it comes to evidence-based practices.
Yeah. So I want to go back to Ron about something, but I really need to make sure that, and maybe I'm not being clear about my question, Aisha. I am not asking about the Bowser administration or anything that the District of Columbia is or has done. I'm asking about yesterday's order and what the president said. The president was not talking about housing or he was not talking about anything related to all of the forward-thinking things that you have mentioned that have been tried and are still working in other major cities across the country. And so let me make sure that I'm really, really clear about my question. The president is clearing out homeless encampments and moving people and has said, I don't know. We're going to try to help them. In other words, as has been done before, they're going and raiding these homeless encampments. They're going to move people out. And as you suggested, we do not know where they are going to go. This isn't, as far as we know, we don't know whether or not we're going to have an army of social workers going in there with iPads and clipboards and gathering information. My question.
In fact, we're probably sure they're not going to be that.
That's my point. And the thing that I was asking you is that there is going to be not an army of social workers, but how do you feel about an army going in there and clearing out these people?
I think it is abhorrent. And I keep going back to, I've seen some things in my life, not just professionally, but personally. And as a woman who has been divorced from a spouse, death of a spouse, and understanding how fortunate that I am that I have resources, unlike other folks who find themselves and their children or whatever.
There before the grace of God go I. Absolutely.
That part. In order for me to have moved through each of those moments in my life, I have had to lean into the what can I do to move forward and what can I do to help others. So it's not so much that I'm wanting to not address that I think it's boring and it is frightening, right? They are snatching people off the streets quite literally. And they are rolling it out across towns, including I'm actually a native Chicagoan. I've been in DC for a few decades now, but
so that's what it is. No, go ahead.
Right. And by the way, I have relatives who have lived on the street right there in Chicago. Right. And so it is abhorrent. It is frightening. But what we have to do is figure out what is the opportunity that we have to help each other and to move forward. And that's how I've had to live in my own life. So it's not so much that I don't want to acknowledge how horrendous this is and how scary, tricky, all of the things, all of the adjectives, some things we probably couldn't say on this show today that we are all feeling and experiencing at this time of uncertainty for the district and for the DMV at a time when let me tell you, we came to Chocolate City, of course, because it was Chocolate City back in the day, but we also came because this was the place that was always stable. We had the federal government and all of the predictability of what this region offers, all of the beauty of what this region offers. And you talked about Black folks sitting around the table, all of the beauty that this region offers in terms of Black success and Black excellence. And that is being challenged in a way like we have never really experienced in sort of the more modern recent times. And so it is frightening, but I keep coming back to know where you can go so that you don't end up, what happens is when people find themselves in these urgent situations and these crises, it starts spiraling because you're left to navigate a web of a mess of resources, trying to call a bunch of places on your own to try to figure out how you are going to stabilize yourself and your family and your household. Mm-hmm. And so that is where Harold, that's where I'm leaning in to making sure folks know 311, 211, so that if you have lost your job and you aren't sure if you know that money ain't looking right at the end of this month, going into the next month, you know that there's a number that you can call that can help you to avoid being evicted. Somebody that could pay that rent, that could pay that light bill, so that you can avoid it spiraling out of control, as so many people experience in the DMV.
Ron, let me ask you this question, and this is really important as it relates to policing. So we know that even last week, the reporting was that the National Guard and possibly the military would be in high tourist areas, and arguably the circles, Thomas Circle, Logan Circle, DuPont Circle, Capitol Hill. But if that does happen, if we see this surge of additional federal officers in these places uptown, what do you believe this will do for the communities east of the river? Do you believe that we did see them, I believe it was last night, over on Bidding Road near Heckinger Mall, but do you think that we're going to see them farther east, Minnesota and Benning, by the shrimp boat? Are we going to see them? I'm telling my age, by the Morton Building at Pennsylvania Avenue. I know that.
Wait, Harold. Let me tell you. When I first moved to DC, I moved by the shrimp boat.
Okay,
I was 2 blocks from the shrimp
that's
boat.
right.
I was right across from the Sister precinct.
There you go. That's where my mother grew up.
There. You took it back.
Yeah. That's right. Where the shrimp boat was a shrimp boat, way back. But Ron, what is going to happen to those communities if you look into your blue crystal ball?
Harold, you know, let me say this. I think that there may be a smattering of federal officers rotating to those places. They're not going to be walking around out there. They're not going to be conducting patrols out there. They're not going to be visible out there. They're going to be visible in the places where white folk are, because this is an attempt to protect the status quo in our city. Those people who, as you were talking, Eugene, I remembered why I like you, because you talked about exactly what it is, the root to this problem. See, you cannot. We can talk about what it is that Trump is trying to do, because he's sending a message. It's about control. It's about I can do what I want to do, and when I want to do it, and that's the message that he's doing. And when he wants to do it, he's going to do it. It's also about the city I believe, has to take some responsibility. Gentrification is at the fundamental ground building of this, because we have seen what gentrification has done to our community. It has seen what it has done to our young people. It has seen what it has done to our culture in terms of the disintegration of it and all of that. Asa, you talked about Chocolate City. And I love Chocolate City. That's why I still live here. I'm not going nowhere. I'm gonna be the last black man in town because I'm not going nowhere. But it's just actually we don't have to go to Newark. We can go to Baltimore. The young mayor in Baltimore has reduced youth crime by over 60% because he did some of the things that Washington, D.C. used to do. We used to keep our high schools and junior high schools open late at night so the young people would have a place to go. Why do you think they go down to the Navy Yard? You talked about going down to the portrait gallery when they lit up when they lit up 7th and 8th Street, I wasn't surprised that they was going to be down at 7th and 8th where the lights was at. That's where everybody's, if everybody wanted to go down there because it was all lit up. That wasn't the history of 7th and 8th. It was dark. It was Chinatown. When they lit it up, people wanted to be there. Young people wanted to be where all those things are happening. And if you don't want them to be there, then give them something constructive to do. We need to open back up the rec centers. We need to put some things in there that young people enjoy rather than what the white folks enjoy that's part of the gentrification of this city. Those are the things. Come on, let's be real. We need to stop playing with each other. Because that's been the reason why we're in the situation that we're in. So what Trump is doing is a continuation of those things that the city was doing all along that was hurting our community and have hurt our community. So no, they're not going out there, Harold. There may be a smidgen, but they're going to be in the places where people are, where the white folk are, and where they're going around DuPont Circle, Thomas Circle, and all of that. We talked about that young boy was beat up, and they arrested
Logan
the kid.
Circle, yeah.
But they haven't talked about what was he doing. Was he drunk? Was he disorderly? Was he messing with? Did he bring that on himself? Because there is such a thing of bringing stuff on yourself sometimes, depending on your own behavior. So they arrested the people. So are we going to continue to punish the city for something that the police did their job? They did their job. So, but it's a lot to comb through, Harold.
Let me bring Eugene back in here, because Eugene, I do want you to talk about the politics of kind of where we are. And I've said on this program many times, Mayor Muriel Bowser is no shrinking violet, and she has been put in what some would see from a political standpoint an untenable position. So how do you see how she has been able to manage this when her tone and tenor has been even keel against what some may say are her better instincts, when she could come, with bring the Ward 4, and speak up, speak out, and hit anybody else with a what we not gonna do. But right. Of course, this is a just such a unique situation, Eugene.
It is a unique situation. I think the first thing we just have to note is every DC government official is always in a bad position vis-a-vis federal power because we do not have statehood. And this has to, I think, be a moment for DC residents to renew the call historically that has been going for many years since the Home Rule Act in the 1960s, that we need to take the next step and we need to have DC statehood. And I think that this has to be a big issue. DC is the number one percentage in terms of people who vote for the Democrats, pretty much every 4 years. But you look at when Barack Obama was president for the first 2 years, you look at when Joe Biden was president for the first 2 years, when they had the Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate and the presidency, they refused to move DC statehood. And there certainly is a way you can move DC statehood through Congress. So I think people have to start asking themselves, if we're going to be the quote unquote most democratic city out there, when are the Democrats going to actually deliver for the residents of Washington, DC, and make sure that DC statehood is immediately on the agenda? So at the very least, you have an opportunity to, sue the federal government like some of these other states are doing, or whatever you can do. So I think that's one. I think two, to me, it's not a question of the tone per se. It's a question of what do you do when you recognize that you are at a structural imbalance? And I think that obviously there are limited structural tools because of the nature of DC as a colony, essentially, and without having statehood. So then the question becomes the question that the Black liberation movement in America, since the time we got here, has always raised. If we do not have the actual legal, administrative, bureaucratic leverage, we actually have to take to the streets and try to grind things to a difficult, whatever the various different realities may be. And we don't see that from anyone in the DC government. It's not just Muriel Bowser, who, I have a long history of criticizing, but quite frankly, it's most of the DC council that spends a lot of time criticizing Muriel Bowser, and then themselves, they have very little to offer in terms of pushing back. There was a time that used to be that DC government workers got days off to protest for statehood during Mayor Sharon Pratt Kelly, and tens of thousands of people would hit the streets. And so how are we going to actually recognize the fact that in a sense, in a time where in a way, Trump is asking us, are we willing to fight for our rights? The Trump administration is basically rooted in destroying the gains that the civil rights movement brought to this country. And those are, of course, the Voting Rights Act, which we just passed the 60th anniversary of, but we don't talk about, really it was because of civil rights that we have Medicaid, that we have Medicare, that we have, fair employment on the job, that we have many of the different things that people look at economically as well that have been so significant, that we have HUD, that we have the Department of Education. So Trump is basically declaring war on Black America and saying everything you brought for Black people in this country, and quite frankly, all poor and working class people in this country, we're going to destroy that. So the question becomes, what do you do? And I think that's the balance stick for every person, but also the politicians.
I should have the last word, but Ron, I need you to briefly talk about something, and this is really, really important. I'm going to give you a minute because the president was saying that DC is just in such a terrible place right now as it relates to crime. But you were in the department when DC stood for Dodge City. I was a new college graduate when I moved back to DC during when blood was running in the streets. Just kind of real quick, kind of contrast where we are now. 100 murders last night in DC, but it's not the way it was.
There's no comparison, Harold. There's no comparison. It was wild and woolly then, and because of crack and heroin and the whole process and the things that was going on. Also, the police department had to assume some responsibility because the strategy that they was using to fight against it wasn't working. Lock up everybody, not a measured approach, no relationship in the community. So it was very different. And thank God we have passed through that, and we're at the end of it. But there's some things that still we need to be doing, but in no way. And there was a time Tyrone Parker and I had a conversation. He started the Lines of Concern. There were over 400, almost 500 murders in Washington D.C. And now we're talking about less than 80 and all of that. And look, that reduction was really the hard work of organizations like the Alliance of Concerned Men and other crime prevention organizations, formerly incarcerated groups that put that work together. The police took some of the credit, but the real credit went to those citizens, Tyrone and them, that was doing that work at the level that really where the rubber met the road. So, but today,
I'm almost out of time, Ron, and I wanted to give Aisha the last 30 seconds. Aisha, real quick, just some final thoughts from you.
I really appreciate the discussion and hope you will have us back, because this is evolving on an hourly, sometimes minute by minute basis. But I wanted to come back to something that Eugene said, and it's really like, what are we going to do, either as community members, setting aside asking what Muriel Bowser is going to do, what are you going to do? Ask, what am I going to do to make sure that we're here to weather this storm? Black folks and the district have been here and been there, done that, got the t-shirts, rolled the credits. We will eventually roll the credits on this moment in history. But we have to make sure that we and our loved ones and that our neighbors, our community members, that we are still here after to put things back together again.
That's right.
That's better future than what we've ever seen before. That's going to take hard work. So I would just say, let's lean into each other. Let's figure out, what are we prepared to do for ourselves? And also, what are you prepared to do to be able to protect you and yours, so that you don't find yourself snatched up off the street at any given time.
That's true.
Because you are unhoused or otherwise unprotected from the significant and gross encroachments of this administration.
I want to thank all of you, Aisha Williams, Eugene Puryear, Ron Hampton. Thank you for the conversation. We will be bringing you back. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, August 12th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.